Okay. All right, yes, ma'am?
Good afternoon, Mr. Depp.
Good afternoon.
Can you please tell the jury why you're here today?
Yes. About 6 years ago, Ms. Heard made some quite heinous and disturbing, brought these disturbing criminal acts against me that were not based in any species of truth. It was a complete shock that it just didn't need to go in that direction, as nothing of the kind had ever happened, though the relationship, there were arguments and things of that nature, but never did I myself reach the point of striking Ms. Heard in any way, nor have I ever struck any woman in my life. And so at the time, because the news of this, her accusations had sort of permeated the industry and then made its way through media and social media, became quite a global let's say, quote-unquote, fact, if you will. And since I knew that there was no truth to it whatsoever, I felt it my responsibility to stand up not only for myself in that instance, but stand up for my children, who at the time were 14 and 16, and so they were in high school, and I thought it was diabolical that my children would have to go to school and have their friends or people in the school approach them with the infamous People magazine cover with Miss Heard with a dark bruise on her face. And then it just kept, it kept multiplying. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. So it was my responsibility, I felt, to not only attempt to clear my name for the sake of, well, for many reasons, but I wanted to clear my children of this horrid thing that they were having to read about their father, which was untrue. And also, after many years of being in this industry, at the time it was I'd probably been in the industry 30 plus years, 35 years. Never had any problems, anything like that. And I had met many people over the years, many of the people, and had the opportunity to talk to those people and to even give advice to these people. And I'm not, my goal is the truth. My goal is the truth because it killed me that people that I had spoken with, that I had met with over the years, who maybe were in a not such a great position and they needed advice, and I gave them the best advice I could. All I could think of was that those people would think that I was a fraud and that I had lied to them. And so I had to wait for my opportunity to address the charges, which were criminal charges. And they just weren't true. So I felt the responsibility of clearing the record as the only way that I could get to the point where I could speak has really taken this full 6 years. And it's been 6 years of trying times. It's very strange when one day you're Cinderella, so to speak, and then in 0.6 seconds you're Quasimodo. And I didn't deserve that, nor did my children, nor did the people who have believed in me for all these years. I didn't want any of those people to believe that I had done them wrong or lied to them or that I was a fraud. I pride myself on honesty. I pride myself on truth. Truth is the only thing I'm interested in. Other lies will get you nowhere, but lies build upon lies and build upon lies. It's too much to cover. I'm obsessed with the truth, and so today is the first opportunity that I've been able to speak about this case in full for the first time.
Mr. Depp, how do you feel about the intimate details of your life being aired in this process?
As a father, raising kids, when they were very, very little, it was important to me, very important to me, to try to shield my children as much as possible from looking at their father or their mom, for that matter, as novelties. I didn't want my children to experience hordes of paparazzis. So I was always a very private person. So for me to come up here and stand before you, or sit before you all, and spill the truth is quite exposing. And it's unfortunate that it's not only exposing for myself, it's exposing for my family, it's exposing for Miss Heard, it's exposing for, it never had to go in this direction. And so I can't say that I'm embarrassed because I know that I'm doing the right thing.
Now, Mr. Depp, I'd like to turn a bit to your upbringing. We heard a bit from your sister Christy last week, but can you please tell the jury in your own words about your childhood upbringing?
I had a very interesting childhood, one that I thought was normal until a certain age. My mother, I was born in Kentucky, and then we moved, in which we moved around quite a lot when I was a kid. So you were always just, my mom had this, her feet were on fire and she had to move, you know, so we moved constantly. So you were always the new kid, and that wasn't ever particularly pleasant. Then we moved to Florida, South Florida, when I was about 7 or 8. And again, moved several times. But my mother was quite unpredictable. She was very unpredictable. She was she had the ability to be as cruel as anyone can be with all of us. That is to say, my sister Christy and my brother Danny and my sister Debbie, and also my father. So, essentially, she could become quite violent, and she was quite violent, and she was quite cruel, and though there was physical abuse, certainly, which could be in the form of an ashtray being flung at you, you know, it hits you in the head, or you'd get beat with a high-heel shoe or a telephone or whatever's handy. So in our house, there was we were never exposed to any type of safety or security. The only thing that one could do, really, was to try to stay out of the line of fire. I started to be able to observe, and I could start to see when she was about to head into a situation where she was going to get riled up, and somebody was going to get it. Generally, it was me.
Mr. Depp, you mentioned that your mother could be cruel. How could she be cruel?
The various categories, I suppose, there's physical violence, of course, there's physical abuse, to which she was, that was a constant. That was just a constant, you know. We were all somewhat shell-shocked, you know. Even if she just walked past us, you'd sort of shield yourself because you didn't know what was going to happen. Excuse me. And so there was the physical abuse, which was a constant. There was quite a lot of verbal abuse. There was quite a lot of name calling and bullying. You know, making fun of whatever defect, you know, one might have. You know, if my brother wore glasses, so of course he was four eyes, and his teeth were messed up in the front, so he was buck-toothed as well. My sister Christy which this is such a hideous psychological play. My father's parents were quite refined. My mother comes from Eastern Kentucky, which is where you grow up in shacks and hollers, you know. And my mother despised my father's parents. And my grandmother's name was Violet. And every now and again, you would hear my mother just scream across the house, "Come here, Violet. Get in here, Violet." And Christy, my sister, knew very well that that was a deep cut, psychologically, emotionally. But we had to take it. I mean, you just had to take the pain. I was born with a very strange, it was a very rare thing in my eye, as the back of the lens is spherical, normally is spherical, so in this eye isn't normal. This eye, I was born with a more conical lens, so my brain never learned to see out of my left eye, and they noticed when I was about 3, 4, that I had a lazy eye, a wandering eye, and she would call me cockeye, one eye, anything she could get to demean, humiliate. I even had to wear an eye patch on my good eye to strengthen my bad eye, so that it would cease to wander. It was exercising the muscles of the eye, though the brain had never learned to see. So I still, my vision in my left eye is, I'm legally blind in my left eye. But so yeah, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, was almost worse than the beatings, because the beatings were just physical pain, and the physical pain you learn to deal with, you learn to accept it, you learn to deal with it. But the psychological and emotional abuse, that's what kind of tore us up, I think.
What about your father? What was he like?
My father was a very kind man. In fact, my father's still alive. He's a very kind man. He's a very quiet man. In fact, he's very shy. Not a confrontational person in any way. And when Betty Sue, my mother, would go off on a tangent toward my father, and of course in front of the kids it was no matter to her. He amazingly remained very, very stoic, and never, as she was rationing him with horrible things, he stood there and just looked at her while she delivered the pain, and he swallowed it. He took it. There was never one moment, never a moment when my father lost control and attacked my mother or hit my mother or even said a bad thing to my mother. The things that I witnessed were, there were a couple of times when it got too far, that I could see his eyes welling up as he was staring at her, saying nothing. And then the most that he would do is he would punch a wall. I once saw him punch a wall and shatter his hand because it wasn't drywall. It was proper concrete and steel wire and rebar and things of that nature. And but still, never touched her, never argued with her. He remained a gentleman. And to me, as a 5-year-old boy, I kept thinking to myself, I kept wondering why does he take it? How does he take this? And why doesn't he leave her? But he didn't, you know. He was able to maintain his calm and his composure. He was able to maintain his relationship with his children. He was a good man. He is a good man.
You mentioned that you saw your father punch a wall. How many times did you witness that?
I mean, out of I couldn't count the amount of fights that they had, but I know that I've seen my father strike a wall 2 or 3 times tops. Once when he broke his hand, but yeah, 2-3 times at tops, you know.
Was your father ever abusive to you or any of your siblings?
No, my father was not an abusive man. At the same time, my father was also, to some degree, at the mercy of Betty Sue, because if he argued with what she wanted done, that would just turn into another barrage of hatred towards him. So I can remember my father coming home from work, and maybe I'd gotten a bad report card, or maybe I'd gotten in trouble at school, or something like that. And my father would arrive home from work, and the first thing she would say was, "John, take him out there. He gets the belt. Give him the belt." And he wanted to know what it was about, so he'd take me out to the garage, and I'll never forget this white, thick leather 1970s era, thick leather white belt that he would take off, and then he would commence to inflict the punishment on me. But interestingly, there was one time when my father, I kept telling him I didn't do this. It was another incident. I kept swearing to him that I did not do what Betty Sue, what my mom had said that I'd done. But he went through with the punishment anyway. And then, not long after, he found out that I had been telling the truth and that I hadn't done what what my mom had said that I'd done. And he came to me and apologized to me for having gone through with the whipping, you know, with the belt. And I have to say, my mom never did that. She couldn't. She knew what she knew. She was raised how she was raised. And I had no power to change what was inside of her, you know.
How did your parents' relationship ultimately come to an end, to your understanding?
When my father left, I didn't realize that he had left. He left for, I was 15. I had already left school, and I was a musician. I was playing in clubs and such. And he left for work one morning, just like every day, and was packing his car, and then he left. And then hours later, my mom, Betty Sue, came home from work. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. And she walked in the door and stopped and just looked around like she felt something. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Your daddy's gone." I said, "Well, yeah, I seen him leave for work this morning." She said, No, he's gone. And she ran into their bedroom and into their closet, and I followed her, and she opened the door, and there was his rack of clothing and all his belongings were gone. And she was quite upset. And I took her car and drove to my father's work, and I sat down in front of him at 15, and I said, "Listen, seems as though somebody stole all your clothes out of the closet." And he said, yeah. He said, "I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I can't live it anymore. You're the man. You're the man now." And those words didn't quite sit well with me. I didn't feel like I was ready to hear those words. But that's what I got. Then my mom went into a very, very dark place, a very deep, dark depression, as you can imagine. And one afternoon I woke up, I'd fallen asleep, and I woke up and walked out into the living room, and I saw my mother very feebly, and like almost, it was like a slow motion crawl. If I could stand up, I could show you just what I saw. Do you mind?
No, you can stand up.
Thank you. I saw my mother, you know, in that mode. So instantly, I knew that something was dreadfully wrong, and there was drool coming out of her mouth. And as I was about to run and call, the front door busted open, and my uncle and two paramedics came in and threw her on the gurney and whisked her out of the house to get her to the hospital to pump her stomach. She had swallowed a multitude of pills to try to take herself out, to try to commit suicide. And when she got out of the hospital, she was a small firecracker of a woman. She was about 5'2". But when she got out of the hospital, the depression was so deep, she was down to, like, she lived on the couch and she weighed about 70 pounds. And that, all that imagery spun into my head at that time, that I thought that was a very, in my head at the time, I thought that that was a cowardly way for my father to have left. And I was deeply upset by that. Until my father and I had a conversation years later, where I asked him what really happened, how did it happen when I was older, and he told me the story.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure.
Mr. Depp, how did you feel about your father when he left?
I was very disappointed in him, because I started to believe that his exit was sneaky, cowardly. He didn't, when he said goodbye to me, when he left for work that morning, he just said goodbye, goodbye, Bob. And I went, see you later, Pop. That was it. Until I learned the truth from him.
And without getting into what your father told you, how has your impression of your father changed now?
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, this is just an understanding of his perception of his family.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Mr. Depp, what have you learned from your experience in your childhood and observing your father in your childhood?
I learned that I was wrong about my first impressions of his exit from the family. Very wrong. And I'll tell you one thing that I learned that was one of the best lessons I believe I've ever learned in my life, ever could learn in my life, was based on my experiences as a child and what I'd seen and experienced. I knew exactly how to raise children. When my girl Vanessa got pregnant, I knew exactly how to raise children, which was to do the opposite of what they did, of what Betty Sue did. Never raise your voice in front of the children, never. Screaming out the word no to them. I never wanted to tell my kids no. I wanted to tell them that, I wanted to show them that there were options. You don't have to stick the coat hanger in the electrical socket. You know, saying no is an abrupt thing, but to talk to them and say, if you understand the repercussions of something, then you won't go there. So maybe think about this as opposed to this. Give this some thought, you know. But that will clearly, that could kill you. So I would ease them away from things of that nature with a more of a conversation, as opposed to a you know, a flat out, don't you ever do that again, and threats and things of that nature. I did not raise my children that way. Nor did Vanessa. We never raised our voices in front of our children, ever.
How do you think your experiences with your parents in your childhood affected your approach to your relationship with Miss Heard?
I'm sorry, one more time.
How did your experiences observing your parents as a child affect your approach to your relationship with Miss Heard?
Well, in the beginning of my relationship with Miss Heard, there was, from what I recall and what I remember, she was it was as if she was too good to be true. She was attentive, she was loving, she was smart, she was kind, she was funny, she was understanding, and we had many things in common, certain blues music and, well, music, literature, things of that nature. So for that year or year and a half, it was amazing. There were a couple of things that, I don't know, stuck in my head that I noticed that I thought might be a little bit of a dilemma at some point. For example, I worked quite a lot, and when I would come home from work, I would come in the house or the hotel, and she would sit me down on the couch and give me a glass of wine and take my boots off, set them to the side, and I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. I just never thought that was, I just never experienced that before. And it became a regular thing that she did, this kind of routine. And I remember one night I came home from work, and I think she was on the phone or something, or busy. She was doing something, and so I sat down on the couch and I took my boots off, and suddenly Miss Heard approached with this look on her face that she just said, "What did you just do? What did you do?" I said, "What do you mean?" "You took your boots off." I said, "Yeah, yes, I did. You were busy, you know." No, that's my job. That's what I do. You don't do that. I do that. okay, all right then. And then she said, let me get you a glass of wine. And she brought me the glass of wine. But I did take pause, of course, at the fact that she was visibly shaken or upset that I had broken her rules of routine. I thought that strange. And then once you notice something like that, then you start to notice other little tidbits and things that come out. And then within a year and a half, she had become another person almost.
Mr. Depp, we're going to talk about Miss Heard in a couple minutes, but I'd like to first talk about your career in Hollywood. And so could you please tell the jury how you ended up acting in the first place?
I ended up acting by accident. I was a musician, and I'd moved out to Los Angeles with my band when I was 20 years old. And then there were a couple of things that happened in the band where the band split up, and I remember I was filling out job applications, and then Nick, with a friend of mine who happens to be, he was an actor, less known then than he is now, Nicolas Cage. And I was filling out job applications at any, video stores, clothing stores, anything, just to be able to pay the rent. And Nick Cage said, why don't you meet my agent, because I think you're an actor. I think you could be an actor. And I said, look, I'll meet anybody, I'll do anything at this point. And so he sent me to his agent, Eileen Feldman, and I met with her. She sent me to read for a casting director named Annette Benson, who was casting a film called The Nightmare on Elm Street. And they brought me back to read for the director, Wes Craven, and I read for Wes Craven and somehow got the job. But I mean, I was by no means an actor. I didn't have any desire to be an actor. I was a musician. But the fact that these people were going to pay me what I found to be a ludicrous sum of money, which was, it was kind of the SAG minimum. It was $1,284 a week, which I'd never seen that kind of dough before in my life. And so I suddenly, and then I did some other couple of dumb movies because I still, in my mind, I was a musician, and this was just a way to pay the rent, pay the bills, live. Then suddenly I found myself on that road. I had been placed on that road as an actor, and then one thing led to another from film to film, and then I was cast in a TV series called 21 Jump Street when I was 22, I believe.
Mr. Depp, between the time that you were cast in Nightmare on Elm Street and you were cast in 21 Jump Street, how did you enjoy acting during that time?
It was foreign to me. It was foreign to me, but I didn't have any great ambition to be an actor. I'm a naturally, normally, I've always been quite a shy person. I've always been quite introverted. And so there was a very strange metamorphosis from being one of four, that is to say, one of four in a band where you have this fraternity or this brotherhood, and you're out there fighting the world together to try to get that record deal or whatever you're looking for. And when I got on the series and my life started to change in various ways, that is to say that people started to, you know, you go into a restaurant and you'd see people whispering and pointing and all that. I was very uncomfortable with it. I was very uncomfortable with it, and I didn't like it. Just because I never wanted to be the lead singer and the guy out front and will get all the attention, and I didn't. So suddenly I was on my own, and I was having to deal with this newfound sort of notoriety, and it was odd. It was very odd, and it was. Yeah, it was a very uncomfortable thing. I mean, I don't think it's anything that one can get used to. I'm still not used to it now, which I'm actually glad that I'm not used to it, because if I were, I don't think I'd be the same person that I am.
Mr. Depp, did there come a time when you became passionate about acting?
Once I realized that that's the road that I was on, and that any attempt at going back to music would be it would have been. I hated the idea that since the television series had come out and I'd been exposed as this character or this actor, I had to realize in my own mind and heart that there was no going back to music, because I didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to use whatever amount of success that I had attained from the TV series and that sort of thing. I didn't want to use that to influence, you know, some career in music. I had far too much respect for music than to just become what they wanted me to become, which was you know, teen idol or a teeny, you know, that sort of thing. I fought that with everything in my being. So once I realized that music was no longer an option, then I began to study at various places. You know, the Loft Studio, which is now long gone. In Los Angeles, I studied with some other teachers, Sandra Seacat. I read all the books that you could read, and all that was great, but you realize that the only way to learn, or the only way to learn how to, it's not act necessarily, the only way to learn how to react and behave, because it's just behavior and it's reaction, was to do it. It's on-the-job training. It's trial by fire. So I did my best to work up my own approach towards a character and such.
And what were a couple of the first few projects that you worked on where you were really able to implement that approach?
I would say I would say that the first film that I had done that I really took, where I really felt, okay, I've done the work, I know what I need to do. I would say that where I considered myself an actor, I suppose, was when Oliver Stone cast me in Platoon in 1986.
How did you come to be cast in Pirates of the Caribbean?
Well, that's many years later, but I had been, Disney had offered me a film called Hidalgo, when it was about a man and his horse in the desert and stuff, and I read the screenplay, and I just didn't think it was for me. But I wanted to have a meeting with them because at that point I had a 2-year-old, two and a half year old daughter, and so, or 3, and for 3 years I watched nothing but animated films, cartoons from Tex Avery to Bugs Bunny to that was all I watched with my little girl, and I received the screenplay for Pirates, and it was I somehow in my mind I saw this opportunity, like a way to mesh characters like cartoon characters. For example, Wile E. Coyote gets a boulder dropped on his head, and he's completely crushed. But they cut to the next scene, and he's just got a little bandage on his head. So I started thinking about the parameters that were available to cartoon characters, and if they were available to cartoon characters, and nobody ever asked a question, whether you were 5 or 95, you didn't ask a question. Oh, Wile E. Coyote, of course he's still alive. So I tried to incorporate these kind of ideas into the character of Captain Jack Sparrow, so that I could try to push those parameters and control the sort of suspension of disbelief, to be able to control the characters' actions, words, movements, and put them in a place where the things that he would do or say were so either ludicrous or mainly something that also something the cartoon characters can get away with things we can't. Captain Jack Sparrow can do things that I could never do. He could say things that I could never say. So it was, for me, a way to stretch the parameters of a character and take a risk in doing that. But if it panned out, and I felt I was on a pretty good mission. If it panned out, I thought that it might be a character who would be accepted by 5-year-olds and 45-year-olds and 65-year-olds and 85-year-olds, and in the same way that Bugs Bunny is, you know,
You mentioned that,
believed.
sorry, you mentioned that you received the script. When was that?
I'm sorry?
When did you first receive the script for Pirates of the Caribbean?
The first screenplay I received was 2002, I believe. Yeah, 2002.
And what did you think of that script when you received it?
I thought that it had all the kind of hallmarks of a Disney film. That is to say, a kind of a predictable predictable 3-act structure, and the character of Captain Jack was more. He was more like a swashbuckler type that would kind of swing in shirtless and, you know, be the hero. And I had quite different ideas about the character, so I incorporated my notes into the character and brought that character to life, much to the chagrin of Disney initially.
Now, when you say you made changes to the character, how did you do that?
Just you know, in preparation, you know, the very same way that I've ever approached any character. You look for a back history. You base it on, you know, it could be anything. Like Edward Scissorhands, for example, I based on a dog that I'd had and newborn babies. My sister had a couple of new babies, and I watched them, you know, because I thought that Edward would see things from the sort of from a place of innocence, and not knowing exactly what things meant or were, and also that look of a pure, innocent child when they experience something for the first time. Those were the two main ingredients that I thought would serve the character. And with Captain Jack, again, the cartoons, you know, the Pepe Le Pew. It's like making a soup. You know, it's ingredients. It's just ingredients. There's some Pepe Le Pew in there. There's some Keith Richards in there. There's a bit of you know, I figured this is a guy who's been on the sea for the majority of his life. Quite possibly his brains may have been scrambled a bit by the sun. And also I thought that he'd been on the sea for so long that he had his sea legs, but when he got on land, he just didn't have his land legs. So he could never quite stand still.
How did the film ultimately turn out in your view?
I didn't see it. But I believe that the film, well, I mean, the film did pretty well, apparently, and they wanted to keep going, making more, and I was fine to do that, as there's great freedom in being able to. It's not like you become that person, but if you know that character to the degree that I did, because he was not what the writers wrote, so they really weren't able to write for him. So once you know a character better than the writers, that's when you have to be true to the character add your words, add the rewrites. I was, yeah, no, I believed in the character wholeheartedly, and the initially the Disney folks were somewhat upset.
Now, you mentioned that the film was, to your understanding, a great success. How did your life change after the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out?
Though I'd been around for many years already, and people knew who I was and all that. After Pirates 1 came out, there was a completely different. It was a completely different way of life was being sort of. You know, my family and I were being plunged into. That is to say, you know, at our house in Los Angeles, you would have people trying to climb the gates to get in to see Captain Jack Sparrow. You would have people trying to bust in the gates dressed as Captain Jack Sparrow. You would have and follow you and your family. So that was the moment when there was no other way but to we had to hire more security guards, and I was certainly worried for my kids' safety. And so then that's when instead of just the one guy, there became several security people, because I wanted to make sure that my kids were safe when they went to school, or when they went to Disneyland, or when they went to the mall, or whatever. So yes, more security, and then just getting followed, by hordes of paparazzi and things like that. It's I've had worse jobs, certainly. I can't complain about it. But, yeah, after a while you realize that anonymity has left the building a long time ago. Anonymity's gone. And that's an odd thing to deal with. When you can't just drive down to the diner and get a cup of coffee or something. It's not possible. It turns into something else altogether. So it's acceptance, and of course there's a bit of sacrifice involved. I can't complain about the work that I've been given. I can't complain about any of that. I have no right to. But it does make you have to think very creatively when you've got little kids, about how to take them to the park, or to the swings, or to the this or that, or movie, or it becomes a strategic mission, and that's what happened after Pirates.
Now, you mentioned your family. Who did your family consist of at that time?
Vanessa, Paradis, the mother of my children, who we were together for 14, 15 years. Myself, our daughter Lily Rose, and our boy Jack.
Now, you mentioned hiring more security. Did you already have a security team at the time that Pirates of the Caribbean came out?
Yes, because there'd been more films prior to that. I mean, a number of films prior to that. So I was recognized, and I was known, so if you wanted to attempt to have any experience that might be normal, you sort of had to have somebody around to get you out of a squirrely situation should it arise. So I had security prior to that for who would travel with myself and my family. But not like, you know, when I was at work, back then I didn't have security at work so much, you know, anything, not before Pirates. Pirates was really that was the thing that everything, it all turned around. It all just went weird.
So how did your security team change after Pirates of the Caribbean came out?
Well, like I said, with anything, it had become more strategic, and you had to have more guys or gals because if Vanessa, for example, she worked in France quite a lot, and if she was in France, and I was in LA with the kiddies, then and working, security would basically pick my kids up at school or whatever and bring them home. So that became the routine, driving them to school, bringing them home. So yeah, and then if I went somewhere, it just, the security guards kind of multiplied because you needed to protect your street, your house, your kids. Endless.
So after Pirates of the Caribbean, who has been on your security team?
Jerry Judge was with me for, oh boy, over 20 years. Jerry Judge we've mentioned it before. It was a year or two ago. Jerry would go on film sets with me. He would do reconnaissance missions. You know, that is to say, he would go to a country before we would go there, make sure all the hotel rooms were all taken care of and such. Or when I went on tour with, say, the Hollywood Vampires, which is a band that I played with, he would come on the road with me with another security guard. So there was Jerry Judge, there was Malcolm Connolly, who's been with me for 20 years or more, Leonard Damian, Sean Bett, Travis McGivern, Mark Gibbs. I mean, there are a few.
Are all of these security personnel still with you today?
Jerry has gone on to somewhere else. Jerry passed away from cancer, so Jerry made his exit. But the majority of I believe all of those fellows are still with me, yes.
When did Mr. Judge pass away?
I believe it was two years ago, roughly. Maybe a little less than 2 years ago.
Now I'd like to go through a couple of the names that you just mentioned. What is Malcolm Conley's purview in the realm of your security team?
What is his role?
Exactly, yes.
Well, now that Jerry and Malcolm had worked together for a very long time, So I'd met Malcolm through Jerry. After Jerry's passing, Malcolm obviously took over for Jerry, and so he took on extra responsibilities. He would have to make sure that there was someone on the ground wherever we were going that had done their recon, the reconnaissance, and to make sure that everything was set up by the time we got there, and that it would be a straight shot into the hotel without a gaggle of paparazzi. You didn't have to walk through 50 screaming, hollering photographers. So you'd go in through a garage door and through a slippery kitchen, and then you were taken to your room, where you stayed.
When did Malcolm Conley join your team?
Malcolm had joined. Jerry brought him on, so Malcolm has been with me for over 20 years now.
And in those 20 years, how often have you physically been present with Malcolm?
With Malcolm?
Yes.
Endless, countless, all over the world. Everywhere. Los Angeles, Japan, Serbia, films, tour. Malcolm was my, when we were on the Vampires tour in Europe, throughout Europe, and Malcolm was on the bus with me. We lived on the bus together, basically.
How often is Malcolm in LA with you?
It depends if there's or if there was a larger premiere, where where it had to be worked out so that it didn't turn into a chaotic or dangerous event, because sometimes between you and the people there are these barriers, and sometimes the professional photographers or the professional autograph people will surge forward, and in the front rows of behind these barriers, you have little kids and older women and older men, and so when the professionals would surge forward, these people would start getting kind of crushed against this metal deterrent, and that was the most worrisome thing when you're at a premiere and there are thousands and thousands of people there, and I've always called it running the gauntlet. Essentially what it is that people are there to say hi and to support the film or the cast or whatever. So I've always gone out and signed for those people. I've always gone out and signed for all or as many as I possibly could. To the point of sometimes Jerry Judge would literally pick me up off the ground to make me stop signing, take me away. So, yeah, it was those kind of things. Again, you don't really get used to that, so I forget what the original part of your question was. I got lost in the gauntlet.
I'll move on. What about Sean Bett? How long is...
You want to go ahead and take a break now? Would that be okay for afternoon
That's
break?
fine. That's
Let's-
fine.
Why don't we go ahead and do that? Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take our afternoon break. Please do, we'll take 15 minutes. Do not discuss the case and do not do any outside research, okay? Thank you. Stay there for a minute. Thank you. All right. Sir, just a reminder, since you're on the witness stand now, you cannot discuss your testimony with anybody to include your attorneys, okay? All right, and let's come back, I guess we can come back at 3:35. Is that okay for everybody? Okay, we'll take a recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
ready for the jury? Yes. All right. Okay. You can have a seat, sir. All right, your next question.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to just briefly go through the security personnel that you just listed out before we took a break. How long has Leonard Damien been with you?
My kids are now 20, 23. Leonard Damien's been with me, I believe, roughly the same time as Mr. Bett, somewhere in the neighborhood of 16, 17 years. I can't be precise, but they were very young. My children were very young when they joined the team, which was really after Pirates was released in 2003, the first.
Now, you mentioned your children. What is Mr. Damien's role with respect to your children's security?
Excuse me?
You mentioned your children
Yes.
with respect to Leonard Damien. Is his role in connection with your children's security?
Yes, very much so. Leonard Damien and Sean Bett for quite a while were both sort of assigned, as it were, to my kids, taking them to school, picking them up from school if Vanessa and I were unable to do it, or even if we were there, we would drive with them to take the kids to school. And over the years, obviously, your children, my children have taken quite a shine to them, and they've become like another set of parents in a way.
And how long has Travis McGivern been with you?
Travis, I believe, a little bit less than that. I believe. I couldn't really speculate. If it's a little less, maybe it's 13 years, or I don't know.
Now, you mentioned that you had to bring on additional security after Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
How has the fame associated with that franchise affected your personal relationships?
Again, I would never complain about the repercussions, let's say, or the repercussions of the success of that film. But of course, as I said, there are sacrifices that one has to make. Sacrifices that you're not nearly ready for. just simply when you check into when you go to a town or you go on a press tour or something and you're staying in a hotel, people stay in hotels all the time. I stay. I stay in the hotel. We've found that it's just a lot easier if I stay put in a hotel and not kind of, again, especially if it's with the kids or something, I don't want them to, I've never wanted them to see me as a novelty. I just wanted to be dad, you know. Now, they're well aware of a lot, and they're well aware of pretty much everything. But no, you know, when you get recognized wherever you go, the basic truth is it's pretty simple. People are generally kind and curious, and if they've grown up with you in their living room, from a television series or from various films that they've seen, there's nothing menacing about being recognized. Sometimes there can be. Sometimes people can get weird, but we've found that it's just it's better all around if I stay in my hotel room and don't go out to too many restaurants or anything, because it generally causes a bit of a hubbub. If you go to a restaurant, someone calls the paparazzi, and you go in for a meal, and you come out, and there's 30 guys out there. It can be a little overwhelming. It's not something. I think I said it before. It's not something that it's not something that I've ever gotten used to, and it's something that I hope I never get used to. Because I don't think of myself in those terms. I used to be Johnny, if that makes sense. I used to be Johnny, and then my name, full name, which I honestly find still, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable to say my own name, because when I say it, I hear the commodity, I hear the product. So I went from Johnny to Johnny Depp, and then that name, with that name, Johnny Depp, and some image was cultivated. Certainly not by me, but the media, especially in those days, they must label you. They have to give you a label. And labels are one of the things that I've fought vigorously with regard to my work. I never wanted to be the poster boy. I never wanted to be the I don't have, you know, I'm not built with that kind of hubris. I don't have that kind of confidence. I can do virtually anything playing a character. I can become the character in my work, and that character may be able to spit out 100 words a minute, but me, myself, Johnny, I cannot. So therein lies the difference, you know.
Mr. Depp, other than acting, what other artistic pursuits do you have that may be a little less known to the general public?
Well, I've remained a musician. I've been a musician. I started playing the guitar when I was 12 years old, and that saved my life because I locked myself into in my bedroom at the age of 12, listening to records, moving the needle back, and then learning that piece, and then learning it again. So, so much so that I don't remember. I have no memory of going through puberty. I was just playing the guitar. I was obsessed with my guitar.
Any other artistic pursuits?
I've always drawn since I was very small, since I was very little, and always enjoyed drawing, and then began to paint, and so there started learning about painting and trying to I suppose different ways of expressing oneself, different ways to release the things that are living in your head, whether they be beautiful memories, whether they be horrific memories, whether they be I have I need to create. It's a need. It's a. Of course, I want to create as well, but I actually need to create because I need to summon whatever it is that I need to summon, to whether that's within a film or a painting or a guitar note. All of those things should come from a place of an organic place, a place of truth. Because if they don't, well, then you're just lying, aren't you? Every bit of truth, a person doesn't have to say anything on film. What's important is what's behind the eyes. And if they do say something, what's important is not necessarily the words that they say. It's very easy to say, I love you, but what brings it into the realm of truth is what's underneath it, what's not being said, the subtext, if you will. So, any artistic or creative venture, any film, anything that I do, that's where I'm coming from. That's my approach.
Mr. Depp, you mentioned words, and I think the jury has already seen some words that you've written in text messages.
Yes.
Can you please tell the jury a little bit about how you write?
Certainly. When I was young, when I was about 12 years old, my elder brother, Danny, walked into my room and ripped the Peter Frampton record off my record player, threw it across the room, and said, "You got to stop listening to this stuff." And he put this record on, and it started, and I'd never heard anything like it. It was called Astral Weeks by Van Morrison. So I'm a kid, 12 years old. So my brother had turned me on to Van Morrison, then he turned me on to soundtracks like Clockwork Orange or Last Tango in Paris. He turned me on to books by Jack Kerouac. He turned me on to books by Ginsberg, Philip K. Dick. Salinger. The whole James Joyce, the whole Hemingway, the whole thing. So I became very interested in vocabulary and the unique voices of these writers. And then I started reading people like Tom Robbins and Hunter S. Thompson, and then ended up becoming very close friends with Hunter Thompson for the last 10, 12 years of his life. And Hunter's writing, of course, because of the amount I spent, of time I spent with him, it has influenced my writing greatly. Hunter was known for inventing a thing called gonzo journalism, which is, it's the author putting himself in the situation as opposed to writing it from the author's point of view. He writes it with him in it. And there are great embellishments, and embellishments are great sort of ways that he would twist things and express his feelings, and so he became a huge hero, of course, to me, and a great friend. In my texts and in my emails, or sometimes just even in my writing, you take the subject and you try to express it in your own vernacular, and in that, for example, with the text messages that I apologize that everyone's had to experience. I am ashamed of some of the references made. I'm embarrassed that at the time, the heat of the moment, the heat of the pain that I was feeling, went to dark places. There is no, if you're writing, there is no set place that you have to stay in. You can travel, and sometimes pain has to be dealt with humor, and sometimes dark, very dark humor. I grew up watching Monty Python, so yes, it can tend to get into dark humor. It can tend to get words are used that for emphasis, words are used to express what you're feeling at the time. And it's just like growing up. You learn from those mistakes, you learn from those things, and you move forward, you know? And that's how you start to understand your own vernacular and what's important, you know, what's necessary and what's not necessary. I tend to be quite expressive in my writing, and after after the unfortunate words of Ms. Heard made their way into my heart and my head. Those are two very opposing things. So you're trying to find the best way to express something to a friend. Sometimes you're exaggerating, you know, something that you've done, just to make it sound, just to make him understand that, you know, I'm on planet question mark here. I don't know what's going on, but I know I'm in this situation, and I know that it cannot continue.
Mr. Depp, the jury's heard quite a bit from Ms. Heard's side about your drug and alcohol use, but I'm sure they'd like to hear from you. So could you please just tell them about your history of substance use?
Certainly. Again, this goes back to when I was a young boy. Excuse me. At about the age of, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, I can remember vividly my mom telling me to go get her nerve pills, you know, out of her purse that was hanging on the back of the door. So I'd go get the nerve pills, and I'd bring her the nerve pill. She'd take it, and you know, after a few years, you start to notice, well, you start to think about nerve pills. And then she seemed to calm down after she took those nerve pills. So when I was 11 years old, I wanted to calm down, and I didn't know how to. So I'd bring my mom her nerve pill, I would walk away, and I would take one myself to escape caring so much, feeling so much, to escape the chaotic nature of what we were living through. So that was the beginning when I realized that nerve pills calm the nerves. Pretty young age to do that. I can't say that I'm proud of admitting to that, but I have to say that I knew not what else to do. I knew nothing else that I could do. So as we were all growing up, there was always those kids who would say, let's party. Let's go party. I want to party. I've never used the word party in my life. I've never taken any substance for a party. I have taken these substances over the years, on and off, to numb myself of the ghosts, the wraiths that were still with me, and from my youth. So I needed, everything. It was essentially just self-medication. One of those get me out of here moments, and where you want to escape from is your own brain, your own head.
How often have you used substances throughout your life?
Having started with my mother's nerve pills at 11, of course, that's around the age that you're introduced to marijuana, you're introduced to, and also depending on where you're living and who you're associating with, and who's around the neighborhood. I wasn't shy to try a substance to see if the effect of it would maybe even take a bit more of the edge off. So I started at 11, and I even mentioned this in an interview in TV Guide, if anyone remembers TV Guide, in 1989, where I was asked by the journalist why I believed that kids who were watching the show, 21 Jump Street, about police officers in school as undercover cops, but as students, I was asked why these kids or whoever should believe me or trust me or listen to me, and I said, look, I could, because I've experienced it, and I can tell them that there is no future in it, that there's nothing but a kind of a postponing of the inevitable. That one day you're going to have to face those feelings. One day you will meet those, let's call them demons from your youth. So I was straight up, open and honest at that time in a very, TV Guide was it was right at the register when you checked out at the grocery store. It was like the most popular thing, and it was a very straight little magazine. But I told them I'd pretty much done all the drugs that I was aware of by the time I was 15 years old, and which was true. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I continued into that, forest of possibilities with regard to substances. I wasn't dropping acid every 5 minutes. I wasn't There were many years that I didn't touch a substance and no drugs. There were many years that I didn't have a drink. So as I said, it's never been for the sort of party effect. It's been for trying to numb the things inside that have that can plague someone's who's experienced trauma. But the characterization the characterization of my substance, quote unquote, substance abuse that's been delivered by Ms. Heard is grossly embellished, and I'm sorry to say, but a lot of it is just plainly false. I think that it was easy. It was an easy. I think it was an easy target for her to hit, because once you've trusted somebody for a certain amount of years and you've told them all the secrets of your life, that information then, of course, can be used against you, especially if it's taken to a point that is teetering on impossible, and teeters over impossible, in fact, at times. It's so, I am not some maniac who needs to be high or loaded all the time. In fact, in Australia, from before Australia and in Australia, I had been off of alcohol for, I believe it was about 18 months.
Mr. Depp, you've mentioned some periods of sobriety throughout your life. How many would you estimate you've had?
Quite a number. You know, on various films, you see. I suppose, I guess maybe by example, if anyone's, well, if you're familiar with Hunter Thompson's book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which I was lucky enough to make into a film with Terry Gilliam. The film calls for myself and my attorney to be absolutely blotto out of our heads constantly throughout the film. And most people just assume that, well, they just got wasted and they filmed them. There would have been no way you couldn't act that. You couldn't make that film with two actors who were loaded. There would be no way. And then to the other extreme, Donnie Brasco, a film that I made about an FBI agent. I had to go into a training regime where I had to eat 5 meals a day, drink 5 shakes a day, you know, these protein shakes per day, work out 3 to 4 hours a day because I had to gain 20 to 30 pounds of muscle. There was certainly no abuse of substances then. There's been no abuse of substances on film sets. There have been there's been no moments where I would have been considered out of control. Never. In fact, it's not been mentioned. I'm sure they don't want to mention it, but I remember that because when I was with Ms. Heard and her friends, and we were all drinking wine, and I smoking marijuana, they used to tease me because of what they said was a ludicrous tolerance, because I never appeared loaded or high or any of that. Even if I felt a little spinny, no one would have ever known.
Mr. Depp, is there any substance that you've ever been addicted to?
Yes.
And what is that?
Roxycodone, or Roxycontin, which is it's an opiate. It's I think oxycodone has the opiate and then some pain, like paracetamol or something, and then the Roxys are just the opiate, as far as I remember. And when I was working on Pirates 4, and there was a scene in which I had to grab this large gold and red, stately gilt chair, pick it up and throw it, chuck it out this big giant window. And so I did it, and as I swung around to throw the chair out the window, I felt this immediate electricity from the bottom of my spine down my left leg, and it was like an electricity that burned. So I had obviously done, it was sciatica, so I had obviously pinched something, done something. So I saw a chiropractor or a kine or whatever. I saw chiropractors, and to no avail. Then I saw a doctor, and the only pain medication that she recommended and prescribed to me was Roxycodone. And there was a part of me that was a little bit worried, just in the sense that I know I've witnessed friends and people over the years who have who've had problems with heroin, and I didn't want to get bit by that snake, and I started taking the Roxys, and I was bit by the snake. And then before you know it, that monkey is on your back to stay. And it's not like you take those pills to get high. You take them to, once the addiction has grabbed hold of you. you're not taking those pills to get high. You're taking those pills to get well, or to get better. Because if you're without the pill, your body will start to go into various you'll withdrawals. And so I was on the Roxy's for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, I think, maybe more, I don't know. But the key was that if you take 2, you will be what they call on the knot. You will be that. You will just drop into sleep. So yes, I didn't like being dependent on these pills. I didn't like being dependent on a drug that you'd take only so you wouldn't get withdrawals. That's what it becomes. It's like a junkie. The reason why so many, well, now there's a huge fentanyl problem, but the reason why junkies generally, why they end up overdosing, is because they're looking for the first high again. And you don't get that. You don't get your first high again. So what do? You up the stakes and you put more, you take more. And that's what makes that's what makes things go dark for them. Because they overestimated the amount that their body could tolerate, and they go blue and they die. So, yeah, didn't want that.
Mr. Depp, do you have an estimate as to what year you started taking the opiates that you just described?
When 2000, or excuse me, it was Pirates. Bless you. 4, I believe. Pirates 4. No, it was Pirates 4. Rob Marshall directed it. I don't know what year that was. Maybe. I actually don't. I have no idea what year that was.
Was it before you were in a relationship with Miss Heard?
Yes. I believe so.
And you didn't detox, and you detoxed from those opiates during your relationship with Miss Heard. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, so of course, yes. So they must have, yeah, they did come around prior to my meeting Miss Heard.
After you detoxed from the opiates, have you ever taken any opiates ever again?
No, I can't. That's no. Once you've been bit, you'll be bit again. So no, even with my finger, I think that it was like Motrin 800, but no opiates. No, I have not taken an opiate since, and I won't unless I plan on going through the hell of the pure horror of detoxing, of coming off those drugs. No.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to now turn to your relationship with Miss Heard. Can you please tell the jury how you met Miss Heard?
Mm-hmm. 2000, in around 2008, Hunter Thompson and I were going through some of his manuscripts of his books that have been published, and then I found this manuscript in one of his boxes, and it was called The Rum Diary, and I had heard about it, and I knew it was what they called his long-lost novel, in fact, the only novel he ever wrote. And I showed it to him, and Hunter was shocked. Oh my God, that's where it is, you know. And so he said, read me some. So I started reading this to him, and he said, this is a movie, you know. We must produce this together. And, you know, he got all excited about the idea of doing that. So we went right into it, and we started to set up meetings to get money, financing to develop the project. And we finally ended up getting the money to develop the project and to make the film. Hunter, from his own dilemmas in his life, committed suicide, but having had long talks with him, I knew every angle of the book, but I knew every angle of the film that he wanted, which was going to be a bit different than the book. And Bruce Robinson, who was a great writer-director, directed a film called With Nail and I and How to Get Ahead in Advertising, was the one director that Hunter and I talked about. And so I went to Bruce, who was a friend of mine, and I ripped him out of retirement because he never wanted to direct another film again. I pulled him out of retirement after 27 years, and he agreed to write the screenplay and direct the film. And we proceeded. During the auditioning process, Bruce was, before that, Hunter had very specific ideas of what these characters should be. Bruce had been auditioning girls or women for the role of Chenault in the film, and there were this sort of starlets that were up and coming, or there were some that were well known and things of that nature. But you know, one of the things that Hunter was very against was stunt casting. That is to say, put a bunch of very famous people in a movie and we'll let them go, and then hope for the money in the end. So Bruce had asked me. He said he had been auditioning this one particular actress named Amber Heard. He said that he'd auditioned her 5 times, and he was he wasn't sure about her capabilities as an actress with regard to the film and the character and taking direction and that sort of thing. So he asked me if I would read with her for the film, and I had already met a number of actresses and things. And so what I said to Mr. Robinson is, I said, Bruce, I don't. If you've auditioned her 5 times, you've seen the best and the worst, I suppose. So me putting her, this girl in an uncomfortable situation, you know, saying, hey, all right, let's read this, I think it's a far better idea that we just meet so that I can see how she behaves, see how she reacts, because that's really all it is, reaction, behavior, and you don't have to push anything else, you know. So they made an appointment. She came to my office. I took one look at her and I thought, yeah, that's the Chenault that Hunter wants. That's the one. I thought, yeah, she could definitely kill me. That's what Hunter wants. And so we spoke, and she was sweet as pie, pleasant, again, you know, intelligent, literate, very good taste. And I felt like what I felt and what I told Bruce was, look, when you put someone in a situation that they're obviously going to feel under pressure, it's not the best way to really know what they're capable of. And I made suggestions such as, and which I ended up making to Ms. Heard. I made suggestions of films that might give her some insight into what we were looking for in terms of the film, which is to say, I gave her films like To Have and Have Not, and things of that nature, because I wanted to. There was something very important that I felt she needed to know about stillness, as opposed to, you know, going broad or acting a little too much. So I felt like I could be a bit of a traffic cop in that sense, so that, because if we could connect, then it could work, as long as there was truth in her eyes, and as long as there was truth coming out of her dialogue, you know, then it's all in the editing. So I felt that I could help her with that idea of stillness, and so that's when I first met Ms. Heard.
How would you describe your interactions with Ms. Heard when you worked together on The Rum Diary?
Initially, well, yeah, no, mostly very few interactions. I remember there was a time, I wasn't working that day, but I was producing, one of the producers of the film, and it was a scene from the book it was a scene where Ms. Heard's character was in a nightclub, and we're amongst the locals, and she's very drunk, and everybody's very drunk, and she ends up dancing with a few of the local, like one of the local guys and stuff, and then the other local guys start to sort of close in on her. In the book and in the screenplay, as it was written, there was a requirement for nudity for the part, and I was on set the day that they were shooting that, and as I was watching the crowd coming in on her, I realized, you know what? Because I would check on Ms. Heard and say, "Are you all right? Are you sure you're okay? Because this is, you know." She was like, "No, I'm fine." But I realized that with the crowd surging in towards her, that we wouldn't have to do the nudity. Because if she took her shirt off and she had a red bra on and a skirt, then if she had a red bra in her hand, when the crowd surged in on her, all she had to do was lift the red bra up out of the crowd, and there's no nudity, but it's certainly implied, because then the character disappears for a few days, and she's quite a wreck when she comes back because bad things have happened to her. So I remember telling Ms. Heard, hey, you don't have to take your clothes off. You don't have to take your top off. You don't have to, everything's cool. And she was appreciative. But other than that, we didn't really have much interaction until there was a scene where I'm taking a shower, and then she comes into the room and she opens the shower, and we kiss. And that moment was it felt like something. It felt like something that I shouldn't be feeling, because she had her wife, and even though it was a scene, and she had her wife, and I had Vanessa and kiddies, and yeah.
When would you say your romantic relationship with Miss Heard actually began, if not in that moment?
Well, I think there was something in the kiss in the shower that was very real. So that day after work, Miss Heard had come to my trailer, and I was just sitting there listening to actually old blues stuff, and we had a glass of wine, and we kissed. And at that point, my trailer was the only trailer in the parking lot. She had a mind to stay in the trailer there for a while with me, and I didn't think that was a very good idea on any level, especially since there were about 9 Teamsters waiting to move the trailer. And then that was that until whenever we did the first day of the press junket for the Rum Diary in Los Angeles 2 years later, and she had broken up, I believe, with her wife, and my for lack of my wife, we weren't married, but she was, of course, my wife, Vanessa. We had some not so great situations, you know. She was stuck in America. She wanted to go back to France. She wanted to have her life back. She's a well-known singer there. Not long out, yeah, right around then is when Miss Heard and I started to see each other here and there, occasionally.
Between the end of the filming of The Rum Diary and the press junket, did you and Miss Heard communicate at any time in between?
I don't remember. I remember that there was a white dress that she really was infatuated with. That she really loved this dress that she wore in the film, and so I went to Colleen Atwood, the costume designer, and to Bruce, and I said, "Do you think we can snag this white dress and send it to Amber, you know, after she'd wrapped, because she loved the thing." I remember talking to her, I think, then, but briefly.
What did you like about Miss Heard when you first started your romantic relationship?
She seemed to be the she seemed to be the perfect partner, in a sense, in my head, and for me, because she, as I said, she seemed to be very knowledgeable about old obscure blues music that I listened to and really liked. She was literate. She was sweet, funny, nice, all those things, you know. And she was, and from the beginning of our relationship at that time, for a good year and a half, she was wonderful. And then things just started to change, or things started to reveal themselves. That's, I think, is a better way to put it.
You mentioned earlier in your testimony that Miss Heard would take off your boots when you would get home from work. What other types of behaviors did you observe in Miss Heard early in the relationship?
Little things that you would kind of, it would just, you'd question in the back of your mind, you know, if she wanted to go to bed, I'd say, "Oh, well, I can't sleep, you know, right now." And rather than go and just lay in a bed and stare at the ceiling, I would say, I'll just watch, I'll be out here watching TV or hanging out. And that was just not acceptable. Just not acceptable. It would stir up some rather unusual reactions from her. I didn't understand why I, as a 50-something-year-old man, was not allowed to go to sleep when I wanted to, as opposed to when she wanted to. It started out with little things like that. And again, they just, they just, I suppose like anything, if they're allowed to continue, then they are allowed to grow. They're allowed to blossom into whatever they're going to become.
What were you and Miss Heard's nicknames for each other?
I called her Slim.
Why is that?
I called her Slim because of the film that I'd given her to watch, in terms of stillness, was Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart. And I called her Slim, and she called me Steve, which was Lauren Bacall's and Humphrey Bogart's nicknames for each other in the film. That was their names in the film. And it wasn't lost on me the fact that there was an age difference, and that my God, when Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, that's when they met on that film, he was 45 years old and she was 19. And they stayed together for many years, until Bogart passed away. So, yeah, there was a kind of a joke, not joke, but just, I acknowledge the fact that I was the old craggy bogey, and she was this beautiful creature, just this stunning creature.
When did you first meet Miss Heard's parents?
I first met Miss Heard's parents when they had come out to Los Angeles, I believe, and I feel like that I met them. I think they came to my place, to my studio, and they were two completely opposite end of the spectrum people. Paige was she was an angel. She was an angel, and I loved her very much. I loved her instantly, and we had a very good relationship. Her father, David, was the opposite end of that. He was this outrageous kind of, almost like a cartoon cowboy, And he was, the initial thought, my initial kind of definition for David would have been rascally, like a rascal, But I loved, I grew to love them both very much, as well as her sister Whitney. And yes, it felt like I had been welcomed into some sort of family. I had been accepted into this family, and those relationships stayed solid until just a bit after we'd separated.
How often did you spend time with Miss Heard's parents during your relationship with Miss Heard?
Quite a lot. Whether I used to have a boat, and we would take her parents, her family, and we'd go sail the boat, and you know, drop anchor at the island, and we would spend a week, 2 weeks, whatever, on the boat on the island. Also, they would come to Los Angeles quite a bit. We also would go to Austin here and there to see them, visit them. Every year we would, on their anniversary, I had a friend of mine who had a restaurant in Austin, like a very good restaurant in Austin, and I'd call him up and basically set it up so that every year on their anniversary they could just go there, and they'd be taken care of, and there would be no bill, so they could just celebrate. And I think one of the things we did was, yes, we would try to order them car so that they could drink. No, I was very fond of them, very fond of them.
Now, you mentioned Miss Heard's sister, Whitney. When did you first meet Whitney?
I don't remember exactly when I met Whitney the first time, but I felt when I first met Whitney, there was something in what I saw of Whitney that was much less confident than Amber, much more revealing of insecurities.
Objection, Your Honor, just foundation. What he
All right.
saw in Whitney.
I think if you could answer the question.
Okay.
You want to ask the question again? That's fine.
We can move on.
Okay, that's fine.
How would you describe your relationship with Whitney?
Great. I mean, fantastic. I called her sis. I loved her, you know. I had always felt something. I'd always felt like Whitney had missed out on something.
Same objection.
All right.
We can move on.
Okay, thank you.
Where was Whitney living when you and Miss Heard first started your relationship?
She was living with her then boyfriend, Sean Krajewski.
Was this in the same? Where was Miss Heard living when you first started your relationship?
Miss Heard had informed me that she just moved to a new place on Orange Avenue.
What city is that in?
Los Angeles, sorry, yeah.
And was Whitney also living in Los Angeles?
Whitney was living in Los Angeles, yes, with Sean Krajewski, and yeah.
So how often would you see Whitney when you and Miss Heard were in a relationship?
Oh, a lot. Whitney would come over all the time with her boyfriend for dinners and such. Miss Heard always liked having people over, you know, for dinner parties and social kind of events at her place.
Have you ever done any drugs with Whitney?
Yes,
How often would you do that?
with Whitney.
Yes, with Whitney.
Maybe three times, maybe twice, 3 times.
Did there come a time when Whitney moved into the penthouses that you owned at the Eastern Columbia building?
Yes.
And when was that?
I don't remember exactly when it was, but I do remember that it was after Rocky Pennington and yes, I believe Josh Drew was there already as well. Whitney, I can't remember why she needed a place, but she needed a place, so we gave her penthouse 4 to live in.
And how long did she live there for?
Oh boy, on and off for, I suppose, a couple of years.
And how much rent did you charge her?
Nothing.
Now, you said you did drugs a couple times with Whitney. What drugs were you doing with Whitney?
Whitney and I had done a line or two of cocaine together.
When did you start getting introduced to Miss Heard's friends after you started your relationship with her?
Almost immediately. Well, in fact, immediately, yeah. Immediately. I was introduced to the whole gang, you know. Rocky, Io, Brittany Eustace, Whitney, certainly. Who else? That's all that comes to mind at the moment.
No, you mentioned Rocky. Who is that specifically?
Raquel Pennington. It was Miss Heard's good friend from youth, I suppose.
And I think you mentioned Brittany Eustace as well. Who was that?
Brittany Eustace was just one of the gals, you know. She was one of the gals, and she was quite bubbly and funny and real sweet girl, southern girl. I haven't seen her in. I think that something went sideways between Brittany Eustace and the girls because she suddenly just disappeared from the group.
And when was that?
We were probably a year and a half, or maybe 2 years into the relationship, 3 years maybe.
And I believe you mentioned someone named Io. Who is that?
Io Tillett Wright was a friend of Ms. Heard's from New York City, who was who had identified as she was born a female, if that's the right terminology these days. Born a female, but she was she had chosen she at a very young age she had decided that she was a male, and she identified as a male. And Io seemed to be, again, she was very intelligent, very literate, kind of a go-get-em kind of activist type. And she was writing a book, I remember. She was writing a book, Io, or he was writing a book, rather. And I had a house on one of my, on Sweetser, one of the houses there was empty. And it was in fact a house that I'd set up to write in. And when she had no place to stay or whatever. I called her over and I showed her the house, you know, where the desk was and all the things. And so I said, write your book, you know, write your book here. So she did.
Did Io end up living in that house or just working there?
No, Io ended up, no, she ended up living in the house for somewhere in the neighborhood of a year, I guess. Somewhere about a year.
And how much rent did you charge to Io?
Nothing.
And did there also come a time when Rocky moved into the penthouses at the Eastern Columbia building?
Rocky moved into penthouse 2.
And do you recall when that was?
Oh no, penthouse 1. Sorry, penthouse 1. That was not long after Ms. Heard and I started to begin to dress that place up as our residence. So it wasn't very long after that at all that Rocky came. I had already had my friend Isaac, who you've met, Isaac Baruch, painter. I had already given him penthouse 2 to stay in and live in and paint in, because he'd just come back from Florida, and his mom had passed away, and I think he had about $3 in his pocket. So I gave him the penthouse and asked him if he had enough paint, and so he lived there.
Why did Rocky move into the penthouses?
Objection, foundation,
I'll overrule foundation.
and hearsay. The question potentially calls for hearsay.
I'll overrule that for the moment. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Depp.
Why did, sorry, what was it again?
Why did Rocky end up moving into the penthouses?
She ended up moving into the penthouses. I don't recall. I believe it was something to do with just not having a place. And Amber had asked if I would be okay with, you know, Rocky moving in. And I said, of course. The penthouse is empty. I wasn't in the, I wasn't going to be renting them out necessarily anyway, you know. They were for friends to come and stay. Penthouse 4, in fact, was initially planned out for my sister Christy to have an escape from her 3,000 grandchildren and the amount of workload that she had taken on at the company.
How long did Miss Pennington end up staying in the penthouses?
Longer than I did.
And how much rent did you charge to Miss Pennington?
Nothing.
Did anyone live with Miss Pennington in the penthouses?
Yes, her fiance or boyfriend and fiance Josh Drew. And then at a certain point, I learned that there was another female living there. I wasn't sure who that was. I didn't know who that was. Because it was there were 2 bedrooms, and so she had invited a friend to move in. But I met that person very briefly a while after they had already been living there.
Are you at a good breaking point?
I think
just
this
wanna
is a
make sure.
good
Okay,
stopping point.
That's fine. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 5 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and break for the evening. Again, do not discuss the case with anybody and don't do any outside research, okay? And we'll see you in the morning at 10 a.m., all right? Thank you. You're excused for the day. Thank you. All right. And again, sir, since you're in the middle of your testimony, did not discuss your testimony with anybody to include your attorneys this evening, okay? All right, you can stand down if you'd like. Okay, thank you. All right, is there any other matters for this evening? Sure, sure.